Could Los Angeles Rams offensive coordinator Kevin McConnell be the dark horse candidate for the Broncos head coaching search? We ponder the questions as to why the Broncos maybe need to take a deeper look at him, and could he really be a favorite outside of Dan Quinn, who's set to get a second interview this week? Plus, overtime rules. Is it time that the NFL makes some changes? We share our thoughts after a wild divisional NFL playoff weekend, and in particular, how it impacted the landscape of the AFC from a Broncos perspective. You get that and much more on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos country? Welcome back into a brand new episode of Locked on Broncos. Locked on Broncos is your daily Denver Broncos podcast here on the Locked on NFL Network, your team every day from the South Stands to the end zone. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, joined alongside by my co-host, Sayre Bedinger. Both of us, we cover the Denver Broncos for the Locked on Network and 9 News. Real quick, Broncos country, just a major shout out to you. Thank you so much for making this podcast your first listen of the day. Every single day when you wake up, turn on Locked on Broncos. Help us get you to work, whether you're getting through a workout. We got you covered every single day, free and available everywhere you get your podcasts. Not to mention, you can watch us on YouTube. If you're doing that right now, go ahead, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications so you never miss out on all the action. Sayre, my friend, what a wild NFL playoff weekend between the Broncos head coaching search and some more information coming out on various candidates as the Broncos are whittling down their list to the final 3 candidates here. That we'll see, obviously, a decision here sometime maybe soon. Could be this week. Just a lot of drama, a lot of adrenaline. Like, if you're a football fan, you won. Like, regardless if the Broncos were in the playoffs, we all won because that was a great weekend of football.
It was really good. I mean, it was a lot of fun to watch. Unfortunately, we didn't get to see the Chiefs drop one at home. That would have been the cherry on top of everything, Cody. But man, just great games all weekend long. I mean, truly fantastic, great stuff from the NFL, and of course, they couldn't have really planned it to go any better than that. I mean, game-winning drives to end all 4 of those games to go to the conference championship, and those conference championship matchups, they look pretty exciting too. So, and from the Broncos' perspective, obviously not necessarily quiet exactly. I mean, whittling down the list from 10 guys to 3. So I think definitely, Cody, it was a good weekend for all football fans, especially, if you're a Broncos fan looking for forward progress. I think here we go. We're making forward progress.
Forward progress is always an interesting thing in the National Football League, ladies and gentlemen. First off, we're going to start off today's episode of the show by really talking about a dark horse head coaching candidate that the Denver Broncos could hire as their next head coach. And idealistically enough, there were some reports that came out. The Broncos, they're working on dwindling down their finalist list from 10 interviews down to 3 finalists, which obviously second-round interviews will happen. And one name to keep an eye on, Los Angeles Rams offensive coordinator Kevin O'Connell, and the Rams, obviously a big-time victory over the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the divisional round here. Really interested about this one, Sarah, because, look, everyone on the Broncos fan base is saying, hey, we need a young offensive-minded guy. Here is a guy that is young and offensive-minded, and I think that the first argument you're going to see from fans, well, he doesn't actually call the plays. It's Sean McVay. He helps out Sean McVay with so much. And if you go back and listen to some QB Collective interviews with Sean McVay, he talks about Kevin O'Connell. Here's the thing about Kevin O'Connell. You don't necessarily need to be the guy that's going to call plays necessarily to understand offense. I mean, for him to understand every ins and out of the Sean McVay offense and to be able to understand how to get a game flow going, how to roster build, and obviously for leadership, like he's learned that from Sean McVay. Now, how will it benefit him as a head coach? Well, if he is one of the 3 finalists that are remaining here for the job, Sayre, it tells me that George Paton came away pretty impressed with his interview. So now you have to ask the question, as the LA Rams are in the NFC Championship game this weekend, do the Denver Broncos, are they willing to wait for the Rams to be done with the season, whether that's them winning a Super Bowl, going to the Super Bowl, or losing this upcoming weekend? Do the Broncos wait? Is there pressure for them to get it done right away if he is maybe, in fact, the guy that they really want?
Well, if he is that guy, I mean, you do have to be willing to wait, in my opinion. I mean, you can't just make a decision on your head coaching position that, over the course of the next 7 days, that's going to affect the next potentially 5 to 10 years of the franchise. Obviously, you want to get this move right. So if you believe that Kevin O'Connell is the right guy for the job, just go ahead and wait a week or whatever it is. I mean, I don't know I don't know the intricacies, Cody, of like the rules for the NFL of like, can you name a guy head coach or can you hire a guy officially or unofficially or whatever the case may be. But if Kevin O'Connell is your guy, it's worth waiting it out. I mean, it's only going to be another couple of weeks. The NFL season, there's only 2 games left, and he might not be in the second one. So it's worth waiting if you feel like he could be the guy. Now, if you don't feel like he's the guy, that kind of makes things interesting in terms of like why they didn't move forward with another guy on that list, Dan Quinn, over the weekend. But we'll see. We'll talk about him in another segment here. But I think, and I want to continually bring this up because I think it's very, very interesting and potentially very significant. George Paton's number 2 in the front office, Darren Mugie, he was college teammates with Kevin O'Connell at San Diego State. They're throwing and catching passes from each other. They know each other extremely well. And obviously, the Broncos have a good relationship with the Los Angeles Rams in their front office. And so the intel
Yes,
I'm
they
sure
do.
that George Paton is getting, it's got to be top notch. I mean, and the fact that Kevin O'Connell, to me, Cody, this is one of the biggest points that I think you could make in favor of Kevin O'Connell. The fact that he was blocked last year by Sean McVay.
Well, and I think that's important to know, right? Because Sean McVay, as a head coach, he doesn't, he wants some of his assistants to go on and have success. However, if he wants to maintain success in LA, I mean, it's really about maybe even molding that guy a little bit more, but more so he believes like, hey, this guy's an intricate part about what we do in our day to day. I can't afford for him to go somewhere else right now because we need him here in LA. That is where it really goes in. And I'm glad you brought up those points about obviously Darren Mugie and the ties there to O'Connell. That right there kind of tells me a little bit of everything. The ties that bind, right? It's all about relationships and the intel that you're getting. Man, I tell you what, I'm stoked for this. And to be honest with you, look, I have no favorite candidates there. I always believe that George Paton, whoever he picks, is the right person for the job based on his preference. Now, fans are going to have their own preferences here. I do think O'Connell is very intriguing, especially as the young offensive-minded head coach who, from what I've been told and from what I know, has great leadership skills. Can he lead a locker room? That's a big question there. Obviously, for a young guy, it's a big challenge there. But, one thing you do love after the game, look, the Bucs lost in dramatic fashion after coming back from a 27-3 deficit. You loved how aggressive that the Rams were. I mean, especially when your back's against the wall. One play, you have Matthew Stafford dropping the ball, almost fumbling it to give maybe the Buccaneers field goal range to win the game. He secures it, and then they deliver a strike downfield to Cooper Kupp, gets him into field goal range, game winner. But obviously Tom Brady, Kevin O'Connell, they were sharing probably like a minute and a half conversation on the field after the game. So even if Tom Brady has a lot of regard, because Tom Brady don't just talk to anybody for a minute and a half. So there's obviously some ties there in terms of what he was thinking. And obviously, game recognizes game here, Sayre. So something to keep an eye on here for the Denver Broncos as we continue on here this week. And Broncos country, coming up here in just a moment, both Sayre and I, we're going to continue our conversation about Dan Quinn and some other head coaching candidates here that are getting second interviews this week with the organization. We're going to continue to weigh the pros and cons and provide you with the latest intel that we have here on Lockdown Broncos. But before we do that, let me tell you about the sponsor of today's episode of the show. It's our good friends over there at betonline.ag. And BetOnline would like to wish you a happy new betting year as we continue the march to the playoffs and beyond here. BetOnline remains the number one spot for all the sports wagering action for 2022. It's a new year, and they have a brand new updated desktop and mobile website where you can sign up today and you can receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit just by using our promo code LOCKEDON. That's one word, locked on, to get started today. From football, basketball, hockey, boxing, and UFC fights right to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers that are available here in 2022. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to wager on all your favorite sports. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, Sayre, as we open up the action here in the second half of Locked On Broncos. Once again, Broncos country, hey, thank you so much for joining Sayre and I here for another episode, Locked On Broncos. We have you covered every single day, all year long, because for the true fan, there is no offseason. Thank you so much for making us your first listen of the day every single day. And if you haven't done so already, start listening to us every single day to start your day off with a cup of coffee on your way to work. And if you know people who are Broncos fans and you have yet to get them onto this podcast, go ahead and send that out to them. Encourage it. We appreciate all your support, Broncos country. We couldn't do it without you. We love the interaction that you consistently provide to us here on the show. Sayre, kind of staying on the same realms here of the head coaching thing, because from a Broncos optics standpoint right now, this is the most important part, right? We can talk about quarterback and free agency a little bit later, but none of that will come to fruition until the Broncos have their head coach in place. So now we're just following kind of the tea leaves as to what's going on with the organization. Now, the Broncos are dwindled down to 3 final candidates. We just talked about Kevin O'Connell. One of them is Nathaniel Hackett. Another one here is Dan Quinn. These guys, all three of them, are considered finalists. So I think when we look at three candidates remaining, all considered finalists, Sayre kind of gives us a little bit of an insight as to the direction that the Broncos were going. And I know that there were a lot of fans that were looking at Jonathan Gannon. They're like, what's going on? I don't know if I like Gannon as the potential guy there. Gannon has a lot of respect and praise. He's been nailing his interviews all around the NFL for various head coaching positions. However, for the Denver Broncos at this time, Gannon does not appear to be a candidate that they're truly interested in as a finalist just yet. So that is something to keep an eye on. But the fact that, hey, Nathaniel Hackett, Packers offensive coordinator, Dan Quinn, Dallas Cowboys defensive coordinator, these guys have various other head coaching interviews lined up. The fact that these guys are two finalists, I mean, I think it kind of makes things a little interesting. What if one of these guys accepts a job right before that? Then I think it kind of dwindles down who the Broncos really have their eyes set on here. I wanted to know your thought on this, Sayre, because I think that people confuse what we see all the time with college football programs, those guys going out and getting head coaches, getting started right away. In the NFL, you don't have to go out and rush to be the first to get the head coach signed. You want to find the right guy, and then you want to plan accordingly. And look, right now, the Broncos, the season is still in play for other teams. Denver has a lot of time to get something done. Your thoughts on kind of the developments that are panning out here with Quinn as a finalist?
Yeah, I think it's very, very fascinating what's going on. To me, obviously, throughout this entire process, Cody, you and I have been following along. Everybody who's listening and watching along has been following along every single day. I'd say the prevailing name that's come up on top of this list the whole time is Dan Quinn. To me, my question is this, and I may be missing something here. My question is this: if Dan Quinn is your number one target, why the second interview? Why did you not already hammer out a deal with him? Why is he still accepting interviews with other teams? Those are all interesting questions that I think factor in. Even now, as we're recording this episode, Cody, Dan Quinn is scheduled to be interviewing with the New York Giants today. So we'll see what happens with that. Even since he's met with the Denver Broncos initially, he's already gotten interviews with multiple other teams, including George Paton's former team, the Minnesota Vikings. So my questions with that are, why are you taking these other, if he's the number one candidate, right? I mean, and I know the Broncos wanted to cover all their bases, but as of Friday, their interview process was finished. And so if Dan Quinn was the number one guy after that point, where's a deal could have been struck. I mean, a deal could be still in the works, even as we're talking about it right now. I mean, he's scheduled to go for a second interview in Denver at some point this week. But then you start to wonder, if you're a conspiracy theorist type of person, you start to wonder, like, was the second interview leaked so that he would have leverage going into a job that it's been rumored that he really covets at the New York Giants? So I'm fascinated by all of this, and ultimately it could end up just being that, the Broncos just actually did love Dan Quinn the most from the very beginning, and then they've already kind of talked about a deal, and that's why he's going to Denver for a second interview, et cetera, et cetera. But clearly the Broncos are in no rush. Like you said, they want to make the right decision. I'm interested, though, by the second interview process. I can't remember if the Broncos had a second interview the last time they went through the head coach search or the time before that. I know Vic Fangio got extra time with John Elway after their flight was scheduled to leave Chicago and things like that. So I don't know. I'm interested to know your thoughts on that as well. Like, I don't necessarily understand what's the second interview, what happens in there. Like, you already heard the guy's vision for your team. You already heard XYZ that if you only had one shot to talk to him, you already talked to him about those things. What does the second interview entail potentially, and what does that mean for a guy like Quinn to be on that list?
I think you make a great point about there not being really a second interview that we heard of, like with guys like Mike Munchak, Vic Fangio, like the Broncos not holding a second interview after preliminary interviewing them. Then that kind of strikes me as John Elway being the GM. John Elway is a guy that knows what he wants, who he wants, and the way that he wants it, right, in terms of a vision. George Paton's the type of guy here that where we're seeing the process play out now kind of strikes me as he wants to hear what the vision is, what their plan is, but he also wants to maybe dive deeper. So I think these second round interviews that you do conduct, you can go deeper, right? Because initially what you're doing on those first interviews, you're getting to know the candidate a little bit more. You're asking them a little bit more about their vision. Now you get a chance to have them expand on it further. I'm not sure how long these interviews last. I know usually they last an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours, and sometimes even longer. But for the Denver Broncos, it was more so about a meeting going to Shanahan's where, everyone had a steak and Vic Fangio had a burger. I remember that coming out after they decided that, hey, he was going to be the next head coach there. And everyone's like, a burger and a steakhouse? Okay. Like, I think everyone was thinking about that. I just think that you want to get to know these three finalists a little bit more personally, right? So now, for example, you're taking a look at a guy like Kevin O'Connell. These interviews have to be conducted via Zoom. The Broncos can't really go out and see him, even though that's something George Paton wants. So the fact that he was able to conduct an interview via Zoom and impress maybe tells me that they want to wait and see, especially after this next week. Look, the Super Bowl here is about 2 weeks, Sayre. So things are going to change. The Broncos can wait. As we've seen, some other teams that are probably in worse situations, they have yet to announce a head coach. They still have first interviews to conduct, second interviews that are going to be conducted this week. I think it's just this rat's race that we're going through and seeing. So it's kind of getting to know these candidates a little bit more personally and expanding on maybe some of the things they touched about in their vision, probably more action items. Like you mentioned this in your first interview. How do you plan to expand on that? Like what is your actual blueprint plan to be able to build on, let's say Drew Lock as an example, or the Broncos offense? How can we get them to be a top 5 offense in the NFL? What is your plan? What is your vision? It gives you a chance to deep dive on that a little bit more. So Broncos country. I mean, we're all sitting here intrigued. What are the Broncos going to do at head coach? Once that happens, we're gonna focus on the quarterback position. We're gonna focus on free agency, and all throughout the next couple of weeks here, Lockdown Broncos will be providing you with the latest updates. What's going on around Dove Valley? You get to hear every single day. But coming up here in just a moment, Broncos country. Well, Sayre Bedinger and myself, we're gonna pose an interesting question. We want your feedback. We want your thoughts on it regarding the NFL and overtime rules after a thrilling game that we saw between the Buffalo Bills and, unfortunately, AFC West division rival Kansas City Chiefs. We talk about what we learned from that matchup, but more so we put it into a Broncos perspective coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, folks, let me tell you about the Get Upside app, the sponsor of today's episode, Locked On Broncos. And it is an incredible app where everyone who buys gas, they need to know about it. Get Upside. Listeners of Locked On Broncos are making up to 25 cents per gallon for every gallon of gas every single time that they fill up with the Get Upside app. All you have to do is just download the Get Upside app in the App Store or Google Play right now. Use promo code and you'll get a bonus 25 cents per gallon on your first fill up. That's up to 50 cents cash back on your first tank fill up today with the Get Upside app. You don't have to pay full price at the gas pump anymore, and you can get cash back using Get Upside. Just download the app for free. Use promo code touchdown to get up to 50 cents per gallon cash back on your first tank today. And some people who drive a lot, if you drive a lot, traveling to and from work, commuting long distances, you have a chance to make up to $200 to $300 per month in cash back alone. And you can cash out anytime to your bank account, PayPal, or an e-gift card from Amazon or other brands. Just download the free Get Upside app today. Use promo code touchdown, and you can get up to 50 cents per gallon cash back on your first tank fill today. That's promo code touchdown today with the Get Upside app. All right, Sayre, as we jump into the fourth quarter action on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Once again, Broncos country, appreciate you and all your support. Sayre and I, we have you covered every single day, all year long. Sayre, my friend, we were talking about a wild weekend here, obviously from the NFL divisional round here, but probably the most wild game of the entire playoffs so far has been the Buffalo Bills versus Kansas City Chiefs. It lived up to the hype, a shootout between Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, and yes, there's all the conversations that come along with that. We're not going to get into those there. But the thing that stood out to me, Josh Allen had put the team on his back there in the passing game, and they scored a touchdown to Gabriel Davis, his 4th touchdown receiving of the game there with literally 13 seconds left. And in our heads, we're like, man, 13 seconds? Not sure if Patrick Mahomes has enough time there. Patrick Mahomes marched down the field in 13 seconds, got them in a position to tie the game to send it into overtime, and then they won the coin toss, and then the Chiefs went on from there to win the game. And it's posed an interesting question, as we've seen too, and the Chiefs have been on the receiving end of this back in the 2018, if I'm not mistaken, 2018-2019 AFC Championship game, where Dee Ford had jumped off sides in that game for the Chiefs, but then they get to overtime, they don't touch the ball. Patriots go on to go to the Super Bowl here once again. Now for the Chiefs, they're heading to the AFC Championship game. And overtime, I think, in the playoffs is very interesting because Josh Allen, despite his effort, didn't get a chance to touch the ball. Should the NFL, in your opinion, change the overtime rules to this? I feel like I would love to see the NFL format go to what we see in college football. You know, you have a chance to score. You have a chance to score. Everyone touches the ball. It would do so much, in my opinion, for NFL ratings. But, I mean, ideally, it's crazy to see these two quarterback performances. And once again, you know, the other guy doesn't get a chance to touch the ball. What are your thoughts on this?
I think definitely yes. And that's coming from obviously us who were the benefactors of getting to watch the first walk-off overtime touchdown in playoff history, right? I mean, that
Tebow
was I mean
and
I
deep.
mean in exactly. Yeah. So that to me, I would hate to say, oh yeah, we go back in time. Like that's kind of what I'm bartering with in my mind right now. I was like, would you go back in time and take away that moment just so the other team could touch the ball? Just because of last night's game. And I think that, man, the way they have it set up right now is really, really fascinating. Like, of course, the defense needs to do its job, right, and get a stop. I mean, you didn't have to let the Chiefs score a touchdown. You could have made a play, right? I mean, but it's obviously much easier said than done. So I think there's a lot of validity to the idea that both teams get an opportunity to touch the ball. Watching last night's game, even my bias aside, it's hard not to feel bad for the Bills, right? After you played so well throughout that game, then you don't get a chance to match in overtime just because why? Just because of the rules are what they are. I feel like Josh Allen definitely should have gotten a chance to get the ball and see if he could at least match what the Chiefs did. I'm with you, Cody. I feel like a something similar to what college does, not necessarily lining those teams up
Oh,
on the other side of the 50, but giving them both a chance to score. If the first team scores a touchdown, it's not easy to score a touchdown in the NFL. So like
yeah.
asking the other team to go score a touchdown is, I mean, it still works in favor of the team that scores first. You obviously still have an advantage there. So I say yes, absolutely change that rule to where both teams are going to get a chance to touch the ball, because in a game like we saw last night, the Buffalo Bills, they just got robbed. And unfortunately, that's kind of just the story of their franchise history, right? They've had some seriously tough luck dating back to obviously the 90s when they lost 3 Super Bowls in a row. And it's been tough for them. And to get to that point, to get to a point where you're legitimately in Arrowhead Stadium, or whatever they call it now, you're in Kansas City, and you're getting an opportunity to beat Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs on the road to go to the AFC Championship game, and you can't take a shot in overtime because the NFL rules are what they are. I think that's just kind of I feel like that's unfair. I really do. I feel like if you played bad throughout the course of an entire game, it might be a different story. But man, that Bills offense, they did their part to win that game, and unfortunately, they didn't get the chance to prove it in overtime.
Yeah, unfortunately, the Bills defense gave up over 500 plus yards. Like that was inexcusable. And the fact that you gave up like 13 seconds left and you let them drive all the way down the field, it's horrible execution. Not such great play calling on the defense side for the Bills here, which kind of brings me to my next point. I think we learned that both offense and defense there in the playoffs are extremely valuable. I know everyone wants, Broncos offense needs to be better. No doubt about it. But the defense can't be as bad as what the Bills were, because even if you get to the playoffs, if your defense is giving up that much yardage and those many big plays, what's the point, right? Like, what are we here for? Offense, defense, and special teams, folks. It's amazing. 3 phases of the game. They matter the most in the playoffs, and they also matter in the regular season. I will say this, though, Sayre, kind of to your point. If a team gets the ball first in overtime, they go down, they score a touchdown, that is so much pressure on the other team, because essentially, even if you're on your own 5-yard line, for example, you have to go for it on 4th down. If you're in that situation, you don't get it, guess what? The game is over. So I kind of like the odds. Touchdown for touchdown. I mean, that's it. I mean, you can't kick a field goal after a team scores a touchdown and expect to have another chance. It is over at that point. I think the NFL should adopt and they should look into it. I think it'll make the game a lot better. So, Broncos country, NFL fans, if you're watching this, let us know what you think about the NFL overtime rules in the comment section down below here on YouTube, or you can tweet myself at Cody Roark NFL or Sayre Bedinger at Sayre Bedinger. But ladies and gentlemen, that will wrap up today's episode, Lockdown Broncos, here on the Lockdown NFL Network. We appreciate you so much for making us your first listen of the day, whether you listen free and available everywhere you get your podcast, or if you're watching this here on YouTube, if you are, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, hit that thumbs up button so it pushes it out to more Broncos fans in the algorithm. We appreciate you so much, Broncos country. Mile high salute. We have you covered every single day. Both Sayre Bedinger and myself will be back tomorrow for a brand new episode of Locked on Broncos.